Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. Very happy to take a call on this next part of the bill, which deals essentially with security of supply. And I'll run through some of the provisions contained in this part. But first of all, I just want to pick up some of the comments the Minister made in his very brief remarks when we began this committee stage, because he talked about security of supply. And he talked about the fact that we had several shortage years during the tenure of the last Labour government. Now, of course, I contend that that was all the National Party's fault, because they were the ones that created this mess in the first place when Max Bradford scrambled this particular egg. But, Mr Chair, what's really interesting is Jerry Brownlee used the prospect of further supply shortages as one of the justifications for some of the changes that are in this bill. Actually, let's go back to what the ministerial review, Jerry Brownlee's ministerial review, said about the prospect of security of supply issues. And it said, and I quote, "Overall, it is clear that sufficient investment has taken and is taking place in new generation." So there is no justification to say that there are going to be security of supply concerns because sufficient investment isn't taking place. That's the first point, and I think it's really important that we don't buy into this rhetoric that there's going to be huge shortages because insufficient investment in new generation has been taking place. Second point is the findings of the review that it's in the market's best interests, in the interests of the retailers and generators, to talk up the prospect of shortages, to run savings campaigns in order to lower spot prices. It's in their financial best interests to create the impression amongst consumers that there is going to be shortage so that they can keep spot prices lower. And in fact, that's also the position of some of the larger users. For the larger users, they want to keep the spot prices lower as well. So it basically means that we create a perception of a shortage in order to move the burden of lowering spot prices onto domestic consumers. And I don't think that's necessarily right. So I think what we've got to do is we've got to keep that in mind when we're talking about the security of supply, because it is in the market's best interests to create an impression that there is going to be security of supply. Now, one of the things this bill does is it removes the reserve energy scheme put in place by the last Labour government, the Whirinaki power plant. Now, let's think about this for a moment. As we've mentioned time and time again on both sides of the House, weather plays a huge part in the New Zealand electricity system. The hydro lakes and the wind now make up the bulk of our electricity supply. It is prudent, therefore, to have some reserve capacity that can be called on in times when the hydro lakes are low, when the wind's not blowing, and when the pressure really comes on, to have some reserve supply there. The incentives for the market to supply that reserve energy simply are not there. Because if someone wants to build a 400 megawatt power plant, they're going to want to operate that the whole time. They're going to want to be getting the maximum dollar. They will want to get the maximum dollar that they can get out of the investment they put into that. So they're not going to invest in a 400 megawatt power plant that will sit there and only ever be used occasionally. There is no incentive for the market to do that. So the previous Labour government recognised that need and invested in the Whirinaki Reserve Energy Power Plant. This government is doing away with that. They're giving it to Meridian. Now that creates some other issues. Meridian, who have built their entire branding, their entire strategy on being 100% renewable, are being made to take by this national government a gas-fired power plant. So with a stroke of a pen, suddenly Meridian's clean, green, 100% renewable brand is down the toilet because the national government are forcing them to take a gas-fired power plant. Now, the second part of that, of course, is that they're removing the reserve energy scheme altogether by doing this. Because if I was Meridian and I was the chief executive there and the government made me take this power plant, I'd probably sell it. Because actually, why would you want to keep a gas-fired power plant if you're Meridian Energy? Why would you keep a gas-fired power plant if that was going to fundamentally undermine everything that you'd set out to do in establishing yourself as a 100% renewable electricity company? So it's quite conceivable that Whirinaki would end up being sold, or will end up being sold, if Meridian are forced to take it over, which is exactly what this particular bill does. Mr Chair. Mr Chair.
I call Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. So that's something that we need to consider very carefully. Now, that's the Reserve Energy Scheme. The ministerial review recommended doing away with that. We didn't agree with that, and so we don't agree with that particular part of the bill. The next part I want to talk about is the compensation regime that this bill puts in place. Because the government have said that if there are going to be shortages and conservation campaigns in future years, that the electricity companies, the government have said the electricity companies should have to pay consumers some compensation for that. And they have fixed on the grand sum of $10 a week per consumer, $10 or per account holder, $10 a week in compensation if consumers are asked to reduce their electricity. Actually, the Select Committee was presented with some quite compelling analysis that shows, in the context of the huge profits that the electricity companies can make in times when when there are shortages of supply, actually $10 a week per consumer is trifling, and it is not going to create the incentives required for electricity companies to avoid there being the need for any conservation schemes. I want to talk, so the question then becomes, well, how do we actually make sure that the electricity companies are investing in sufficient generation capacity to ensure that there aren't going to be supply constraints in future years? And actually this bill goes the opposite way, and this debate forces it to go the opposite way. Trustpower said in their submission to a Select Committee, and I'll quote from this, it's a direct quote, "The uncertainty created by the industry shake-up," that's Jerry Brownlee's industry shake-up, "was likely to have a chilling effect on private electricity generators' willingness to invest in new electricity plant, raising the prospect of shortages again within a decade." So the government are trying to say, look, we want to have this market, and they're constantly rearranging it all of the time, and that's actually removing some of the security from the system and therefore disincentivising the generation companies from putting in place the investment that we need in further electricity supply, and that's more likely to result in security of supply pressures. I want to move to what Ari Sargent, the Chief Executive of PowerShop, said in a blog before Jerry Brownlee made take the blog down. And I'll quote from this, because he was talking about the Tekapo A and B asset swap, which is dealt with in Part 5 of the bill, but has direct relevance to Part 4, which talks about security of supply. Ari Sargent said, and I quote, "This puts the security of supply at risk and will see a change in river operation that will increase wholesale prices and prices to consumers, particularly in the South Island." So that's PowerShop. I place quite a lot of store in what they're saying. They're one of the most innovative energy electricity retailers in New Zealand. I think they've got a really exciting market model that they've established there. And they're saying that the measures, the changes in this bill actually will not increase the security of supply in New Zealand. Now, of course, it's not surprising that we're having this debate, because once again we're seeing more and more evidence of where Jerry Brownlee's pushing ahead with something with no analysis to prove that it will actually work. No analysis has been put forward of whether requiring generators and retailers to provide compensation during compensation campaigns will actually reduce the incentive or reduce the need for those conservation campaigns in the first place. There was no evidence to put forward to suggest that would be the case, and in fact some of the submitters argued quite strongly that it wouldn't be. So, as I've said, it may be more cost effective for generators and retailers to compensate the consumers at that trifling sum of $10 a week, rather than have them face the high spot prices. So it would be more worthwhile, if we're concerned about security of supply, to make sure that we are facilitating improvements in energy efficiency. The introduction of smart meters, as I've mentioned before, is one way that we could absolutely really focus in on energy efficiency. And that would potentially, if we get the smart meters in every house and we get them operating effectively, it could actually result in a whole new, a very different model for the way the electricity market currently operates. Because it would allow consumers potentially, and retailers, it would mean the retail model would have to change, allow consumers to buy their electricity at off-peak prices, at times when the demand is lower, and spread their electricity usage, particularly if you get smart meters that will talk to appliances.